Welcome everyone to this webinar presented by the Venezuela Solidarity Network, the VSN, titled Breaking Down the Elections, Post-Electoral Violence and U.S. Intervention following the presidential elections that Venezuela just had on July 28th. As we all know, in these elections, the National Electoral Council, the CNE, declared President Maduro the winner. The far right has since then been trying to delegitimize the elections by claiming fraud and promoting fake news, not to mention attempting a coup and violence by armed gangs. Opposition candidate Edmundo Gonzalez and his backer Maria Corina Machado have openly called for the armed forces to overthrow the government. The latest news is that the CNE has turned over the tally sheets, actas, as well as the full results and evidence of the cyber attack to the Venezuela Supreme Court. The court has called on all the candidates to present their actas, which is going to hopefully resolve these claims of fraud. And to help us understand what's going on are Jorge Arreaza, the Executive Secretary of ALBA, Alison Bodine, an activist and election observer, and Andreína Chávez, a journalist for Venezuelanalysis. So we're going to begin with Jorge Arreaza, who has a really incredible depth and breadth of knowledge about the Bolivarian Revolution. He is currently the Executive Secretary of ALBA, the Bolivarian Alliance for the Peoples of Our America. He has been Venezuela's Vice President, the Minister for Science and Technology, the Minister for Higher Education, Minister of Communes and Social Movements, among many other positions. He was also Venezuela's Foreign Minister from 2017 to 2021, which was arguably one of the most challenging eras for Venezuelan diplomacy. So I'd like to give a warm welcome to Executive Secretary of ALBA, Jorge Arreaza. Please begin.
Muchas gracias, Leonardo. Muchas gracias, Code Pink.
Thank you very much to Code Pink and all the comrades. I was willing to do it in English, but I prefer to do it in Spanish. That's much easier for me in order to be able to share the context. Venezuela during the last decades has entered in a process of a new kind of democracy. As people of Venezuela, we chose in 1998 a national project, and a project that contemplated calling upon the people in order to make big decisions. What Commander Hugo Chávez and this turned into a very progressive and advanced constitution that defines Venezuela as a state, a democratic state of social injustice, and establishes that sovereignty resides in the people and opens the paths to the people organized to have the power beyond the institutions of the state. All this is happening over 3,000 millions of oil barrels, perhaps the most important oil reserve in South America, minerals of all kinds, gold, biological diversity, and water reservations. And this new democracy has gone through many proofs because what we've experienced in Venezuela in the last years, this is something I want to make very clear, that all chapters that we've experienced during the Bolivarian revolution is this fight of national bourgeoisie and with imperialism and transnational corporations in order to take over that power and our resources, and then the people struggling to be still in power. In 2012, we had there was a coup that lasted 12 hours, then the referendum during 2004, then the different scenes of violence in the streets, of the national bourgeoisie in the streets. They attempt to defraud, to say the defraud of elections, the blockades, the sanctions, the attempts of magnicide. All these are part of the long soap opera of historical dispute for the political and economical power in Venezuela. That's why we say this very proudly. We've been able to maintain 31 elections in 30 years of revolution. Different elections, presidential elections in 1998, in the 2000 with a new constitution, in 2004 with the attempt of referendum, in 2006 again Commander Chavez won, in 2009 an amendment was approved for a continuous re-election of the president. In 2008 and in 2013, once then Commander Chavez died, Mr. Maduro won the elections. In 2018, President Maduro won, and in the 28th of July, Mr. Maduro won again. But we've had so many other elections among the 31st of mayors, governors, national assemblies. And I'd like to say that we've had approximately 150,000 elections of communal councils from 2006 up to 2024. The communal council in the territories of the 300 families, they have their own territorial government. They go to a democratic process. They represent a level of government in the territory. This is a democratic participation, and this all exists over the most important reserve of oil of this world. That's why the corporations are governing Washington. Today, the real face of our enemy is not Joe Biden. This was shown during these elections. Is not Blinken. Is Elon Musk. Is the corporations, the big lobbies, technological, pharmaceutical, oil, etc., that are governing these countries, and they take out and in governments in false democracies, and they haven't been able to do that in Venezuela. In this general context, we will talk about the elections of the 28th of July, last Sunday. But I would also like us to value the triumph, the victory of these people after 10 years of consecutive aggressions. We can identify this phase of aggression from the United States and the rest of the cooperative governments in 2014. When they decide to stop recognizing the capacities of Venezuela for financing, they wouldn't let us, not even $1. The banks of the United States left Venezuela. We weren't able to import any kind of inputs that we needed for productive processes. And then in 2015, the unusual threat, the decree of Obama that allowed Donald Trump later on to impose more than 900 sanctions against the people, especially against the central bank and the state and its capacities and abilities to produce and import. And as Richard Nephew says, Barama assessor, these measures, these illegal measures, are there to create suffering and to direct them to where it hurts us more, the oil, so that we cannot maintain the state and so that the people die of hunger. With all respect, Mr. Elliot Abram told me, he told me this on the 26th of February on 2019, as Maduro didn't want to give the power to Guaido. He even offered me to go to the United States with my family and they would give me a luxurious life. Because we didn't want to give up the country, well, then you won't have electricity, food, medicine, and when the people cannot stand it anymore, we will go to impose a peace. When the conflict arises, we will bring peace and we will keep the oil, as Trump said. He even said it, if he would have continued in power, they would have stolen as a war treasure Venezuelans' oil, and they would have the control of the government. In this fight, we arrived to the 28th of July. There was an electoral campaign that was developed in peace. I don't want to compare Venezuela with other countries, but there was no one single death, not even in a demonstration, in any meeting, in any caravan. Everything was calm, despite the fact that we were facing an imperial agent, Mr. González Urrutia. He doesn't like to be called in his one last name. He's a Washington agent, and the woman that was leading all this, Maria Corina Machado, it's an agent from Washington and the corporations. They didn't only ask for coercive measurements against Venezuela, but they also asked Venezuela to be attacked, invaded, and they were celebrating when this country, when people were leaving from the country for due to the economic crisis that these sanctions itself created. People that called for to kill Maduro, who called him a drug dealer, etc. Honestly, for this debate, I believe that in Venezuela, there were no objective conditions to go to an election, democratic elections in this opportunity. It was a country that was oppressed by the sanctions and the aggression we've gone through. In Ukraine, there were no elections. We are also in a war. There are countries that postpone elections for any kind of reasons. But Mr. Maduro, or President Maduro, said we will go to elections no matter what, because that's what our constitution demands. And the most important candidate of the 9 candidates of the opposition was a candidate that was named and supported by the White House and the corporations that govern Washington. And during the campaign, there were proposals. Mr. President Maduro expressed his proposals, and the media, CNN, Fox News, etc., wouldn't transmit the images of the enormous demonstrations that Mr. President Maduro was able to get together. They would only transmit Maria Corina Machado's demonstrations, and they were creating this idea that the revolutionary forces would lose the elections. Then we went to the elections. They had witnesses in all the electoral booths. We also had witnesses and during the day of the elections, they went to vote early. When I mean they, I mean those they call to vote. Chavez was voting until the very end part of the day, and we only have the result that we could only have. Our system was considered the best electoral system. It's electronic, it's concentrated, it has all kind of it's very easy to audit from any perspective. You vote on the moment, you press the button for the candidate you prefer, and immediately you have your vote and it's registered in the computer. Nonetheless, you still have something that proves and you keep in your hand the preference that you chose on the screen. So you have an extra evidence of what you voted. And when the electoral tables are closed, there are different acts that are emitted, and this is transmitted on real time to the tallies, the polling. And we compare more than half of the votings are compared with these acts. And there was no single denouncement that there was any kind of problems with this.
Also, those tallies are signed by the polling station presidents or chairs and each political party. The tallies are not published. They are under guardianship of the National Electoral Council, so that whenever a party or a candidate would like to challenge the election, whether it is in the Supreme Court or the National Electoral Council, you have the proof to allow for that challenge. There is no single challenge of the latest election. That is false. Nor the parties, none of the opposition parties have presented a challenge of the results before the National Electoral Council. That has not happened. They have not even attended the office when they were called. They only candidate González Urrutia and another candidates were missing when they were called upon. And when President Maduro decided to go to the electoral chamber of the Supreme Court and to start a review process of the whole electoral process, to have an expert committee check the elections, Mr. González Urrutia was not in attendance. They are called upon for tomorrow as well. They say that they have proof of fraud. They have published 9,000 out of the 35,000 records approximately on a website that is quite irregular. There is no signatures of the poll watchers. So this is not correct. We all know that such a website or such a technique can be tampered with. The tallies are not published. They are kept by the Electoral Council to verify the results. This has not happened because in the face of this reports of fraud by the opposition on that same Sunday night, and even though they have not presented a formal challenge before the authorities, the president requested the National Supreme Court to review the electoral process, to call for the candidates, for them to present their denouncements, their reports. Let's see what you are seeing on the media. Let's compare your tallies with the real tallies. And after that check-in, the Supreme Court will order the National Electoral Council to pronounce itself. And if there was an irregularity, then the Supreme Court would make the decision it has to make. So what happened after the election, after this call for fraud? But, well, you have to know that, of course, we are in a polarized country, a country where the elections with such a turnout of almost 60% of the population. Chavism's baseline between 5 and 6 million voters who have been loyal to Chavism ever since 2010 or 2012 to date. We have kept this loyal base. We have an electoral machinery, many processes in the field, and a government that has managed its administration for the people to meet their needs, even though we are in amidst this hardship. An economy that has improved since 2021 very significantly, despite the imperialistic intervention. So if 12 million people voted, and we have over 6 million people as a base, of course, Mr. Maduro has 52% of the vote. Mr. González Urrutia obtained 42%, and the remaining 6% was obtained by the other 9 candidates. So if there had been a turnout of 14 million people, for example, well, you could argue, well, someone obtained 55 and the other one obtained 45% of the vote, but 70 versus 30, those are the figures that they say through which Mr. González Urrutia has won. This is statistically and demographically impossible to prove. Any analyst could say that the turnout of 60% of the people would lead to this result that the National Electoral Council has stated. These figures of 70% versus 30% is an insult to the intelligence of Venezuelans and the people in the world. Unfortunately, we see governments such as the United States government who says González Urrutia won the elections on one day, then they say no, they are playing a game with the opposition, and we could not care less about this. This is what Mr. President said yesterday. The only thing that matters is what the Venezuelan people say, and the Supreme Court and the National Electoral Council issue as a sentence. Other countries not acknowledging the institutional process in Venezuela and not understanding that there was a previous review of the voting, we cannot care less. Tomorrow, Mr. González Urrutia is called by the Supreme Court, and I don't think he will attend because they don't acknowledge this, because they voted on a machine and they placed the vote on a ballot box, and even though they did all of this, they did not acknowledge the statement by the National Electoral Council. This is crazy, but this is how they have behaved over the past years. So to summarize, from our point of view, the election was heroic. A people suffering an economic war, nationally, internationally, blockade, sanctions against PDVSA, our central bank, the national banking system, a media war and psychological war, a diplomatic and political war, a conventional war as well, with drones, attempts of killing the president, and green caps of the US who entered our territory to kill the president, a lawfare as well against President Maduro. There is a New York district, accusing him of being a leader of Colombian cartel. It's unbelievable, but this is what has happened. This is a people that has suffered scarcity of medicine, of food, inflation in 2017 and 2018, the highest rate in the world. Hospital input being and missing. There were no vaccine during the COVID-19 pandemic. We were not able to purchase Pfizer, AstraZeneca's, or any laboratories vaccines. And thank God, with our international alliance with China and Russia, we were able to do this, and we were the least impacted country in Latin America by the pandemic. A country where people have died who were not able to get to the hospital because of the lack of fuel, or because there was a shutdown of electricity during a surgical operation, or they could not find medicine for a serious illness that the government should offer and could not offer for the restrictions. Also a migration crisis. Even though we suffered all of this, we gave a victory to the Bolivarian Revolution and Mr. Maduro. This is historical. This is huge politically, to acknowledge that Chavism and the Bolivarian Revolution is a reality, it's a phenomenon, a political, social phenomenon in Venezuela. It has only protected its people and kept in power despite all the attempts, nationally and internationally, to throw it out. Because we are the biggest oil reserve in the world. We are much more democratic than any other country in this hemisphere. We can compare ourselves with other countries and let's see who wins at democracy. We are the most democratic of the countries. Let's see what's the turnout in other countries, how many presidential elections they have held in comparison to us, and who are facing off at those elections. Because at a democratic, if you have a Democratic Party and a Conservative Party facing each other, well, what type of democracy is that? We are comparing here socialism and neoliberal capitalism, and this is what our people chose, socialism. So I want to share this information with you. They have tried to use guarimbas, as we call them here, gangs, armed gangs on the streets. They tried to throw this country into an internal conflicted country. There 48 hours after that, it was all under control. We are in peace. Economy is much better than before the elections, because there was a sort of tension of what was going to happen. But now people said, well, elections are over, let's work. There is no political disturbance since Tuesday or Wednesday last week, despite the fact that the media and social media in general are saying otherwise. So we wanted to share that information. Yesterday, Mrs. Machado and Mr. Urrutia said that they won, and they call on military officers to carry out a coup against President Maduro to take on the presidency. That is so crazy. And this is what the United States has been acknowledging, or the new Lima Group countries as well. The Venezuelan people made a decision. The Bolivarian Revolution is still in power, and we are walking towards prosperity and a period to make our Bolivarian Revolution so much deeper. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias, Jorge.
Thank you so much, Jorge, for being here. As I understand, you will not be here for the Q&A time, but we will have another guest here for that.
So I was thanking Jorge Arreaza, Executive Secretary of the ALBA, for his words and for appearing with us today. And unfortunately, I don't think he's going to be able to stay for the Q&A, but we do have a special guest for the Q&A that will be taking his place. Up next, I'd like to invite Andreína Chávez to speak. Andreína was born in Maracaibo in the state of Zulia. She's based in Caracas since 2014. She joined Telesur as a writer and later became editor-in-chief. She currently works as a writer for Venezuelanalysis and is part of the Utopics Artist Collective, focusing on popular and feminist struggles. And in addition to reporting on news for Venezuelanalysis, she's written some really excellent columns there that I urge you to check out. Welcome, Andreína.
Hi, Charlie. Thank you very much for inviting me. Well, I would like to start by saying that thank you for opening a space for talking about Venezuela and to talk about this ongoing coup attempt that we are facing right now, which is something not new, something that we've been living for more than 25 years. And of course, this is another coup attempt that is being led by the extreme opposition with the support of the US government. So I think Jorge Arreaza just gave such a wonderful exposition about Venezuelan democracy, how Venezuelan democracy is not based only on these major electoral processes, but also just we have democracy on the ground every day being carried out by popular organizations. So Venezuelan democracy is actually much more complex and much more deep and robust than you can even imagine. And I'm sure that most of you who have followed Venezuelan community, Venezuelan popular power, you know about this. So first of all, I would like to start by maybe pointing out some of the things that you probably have been seeing or reading in corporate media. So the things, all the lies that are being said about Venezuela versus what the reality on the ground. So I think most mainstream media outlets right now are pushing the narrative that the streets of Venezuela are on fire. You know, that would have, I don't know, thousands of people protesting against the government, against the electoral results from July 28, that they are facing this brutal repression from state security forces. And this, of course, is not true. What actually happened is that following the presidential election on July 28, we saw the opposition leader and U.S. asset, Maria Corina Machado, immediately reject the official results, the official electoral results that proclaimed President Maduro as the winner. And then immediately after she rejected these results, which is something that we saw coming, because even before the elections, they already said that they were never going to accept whatever the National Electoral Council said, whatever the National Electoral Council published about the results. So Maria Corina rejected the results, and then immediately after, we saw these violent groups of people trying to create these conditions for a repetition of the violent protests that we saw in 2014, that we saw in 2017, when more than 100 people died, hoping for a coup to materialize. So this small group of people have, in the past few days, they have carried out some really horrifying fascist actions, such as the killing, the assassination of two Chavista women, two women who were popular leaders in their communities. They have also been burning, damaging, destroying universities, healthcare centers, schools, buildings that belong to popular power organizations, buildings that belong to the United Socialist Party, statues of Hugo Chavez, and many more fascist actions that we've been seeing lately. So these actions led to the arrest of at least 2,000 people. Most of them have criminal records. Most of them have admitted that they were hired to destabilize the country, to create this violence. So we quickly saw how these quick detentions put an end to the violence that we were seeing in the streets. And we saw that the Venezuelan people in their majority, they went back to normality. They went back to opening their businesses. They went back to going to school, going to their jobs, and just, just carrying out with their daily lives. So this all indicates that this violence was really just something that was planified. It was something that was planified to create this scenario of destabilization in the country, to try to create the conditions for a coup. So that's something that I think it is really important to point out, because mainstream media is making you believe that these are just spontaneous demonstrations and the government is repressing them. And in reality, this is all part of one big agenda to create the conditions for regime change in Venezuela. But of course, there have been demonstrations from opposition supporters, that is true, mostly in the wealthy east side of Caracas. And these demonstrations, as far as I've been able to document, they have been without incidents. They have been widely documented and propagandized by the international corporate media. Nonetheless, these outlets keep pushing the narrative that they are being repressed or that there's some sort of big instability in the country, which is not true. Ironically, what mainstream media is actually hiding from everybody is that there have been daily mobilizations by the Chavismo people. You know, ever since the elections in July 28, almost every single day, Chavismo has taken the streets to defend the electoral results, to reject violence, to reject the coup attempt, to reject US interference, and to reject these new threats that we have about imposing more sanctions against the country. Just this Saturday, there was a quite massive Chavismo march in Caracas. It was nationwide, but the biggest one was here in Caracas. And no corporate media reported about it because it doesn't fit the narrative that Venezuela is of an entire country supposedly being against the government. It doesn't fit that narrative. They don't care to show about people, about Chavista people or the Venezuelan people in general, going to the streets, protesting peacefully to defend the electoral results, to defend the fact that President Maduro was proclaimed the winner of the election. So I think this is the most important part that needs to be understood right now. This is the reality on the ground in Venezuela. It is a country that is currently in a peaceful moment after celebrating a very peaceful election. And people right now are simply waiting for the Venezuelan institutions to continue to investigate, to clarify, and to validate the electoral results from July 28. I think this is one of the most important parts that needs to be said about. I think the second thing is about addressing all these lies and manipulations regarding the electoral results. I'm sure that everybody has heard about the opposition saying that there was fraud committed and the fact that the National Electoral Council hasn't been able to publish the detailed results of the elections. And of course, there's a line of events that need to be talked about. First of all, the National Electoral Council have given two reports, two bulletins, given the results of the elections. In both of these reports, they have proclaimed Maduro as the winner. In the second one, they said that he won by almost 52% in comparison to Edmundo Gonzalez, who got 44%. This is actually very representative of Venezuelan reality, as Jorge Arreaza was saying recently. This is actually quite representative of how the Venezuelan society is more or less divided or polarized at the moment, or always has been. So we saw these two bulletins emitted by the National Electoral Council. And of course, they haven't published the detailed results. That is true. And the National Electoral Authority have said that they are in the midst of an ongoing hacking operation that has delayed this publication of the results in their websites, that has delayed many of the operations related to the transmission of the data. And the opposition, of course, has taken advantage of the situation to create this sort of parallel website where they have published results, electoral tallies, voting records that have not been verified. And that is something that needs to be said a lot. They are publishing electoral tallies that have not been verified. In fact, President Nicolas Maduro went to the Supreme Court of Justice precisely because of these fraud claims. So the Supreme Court can investigate if the electoral results given by the electoral authorities are actually legitimate. And I think this is an incredible step to take because, I mean, this is something that the opposition should have done. If you have supposedly overwhelming evidence about your candidate winning an election, if you are completely sure that you have evidence that is absolutely legitimate, then you go to the competent institution to make these claims, so you can actually prove that you are right. But they haven't done that. It was President Maduro who actually went to the Supreme Court so they can clarify this, so they can clarify that he was the winner of the election. And the opposition, Edmundo Gonzalez and Maria Corina Machado, and the political parties that represent them, they did not show up. They haven't said anything about even acknowledging this judicial investigation. And as far as we know, what they're trying to do right now is repeat this, is to create this second Juan Guaido type of interim government with Edmundo Gonzalez. And so far, I don't think they're going to be successful in these plans because we already lived that. We already lived this Juan Guaido scenario. We already sort of know what to expect, what to do. And I don't think they're going to create really the momentum to be able to pull that off. But in any case, all this indicates that they don't trust the evidence that they allegedly have. The only thing that they have right now is a parallel website with unverified electoral tallies, and they do not care submitting this evidence to the Supreme Court because they know that they're going to find irregularities. They know that they're going to find that many of these electoral records are actually fake or they have been modified. And actually, just a superficial analysis that many people have done of these electoral results that they published have already demonstrated that there are many irregularities. For example, many of these voting records don't even have signatures of the witnesses in every station. They don't have. They have so many. Some of them are incomplete, are damaged. Some of them don't even show out the voting for every single candidate. Some candidates don't even appear. So there's so many irregularities that you can already tell why they are not going to the Supreme Court because they know that they don't have the evidence to support the claim that they are making that they won the election. So I think it's very important that right now we understand that no matter what is happening, no matter what is happening with the electoral results, which is that the Venezuelan institutions are solving this issue, as Venezuela has always done, solving everything on its own, with its own people, with its own institutions, the opposition is going to continue pushing with the coup attempt. They don't care about the idea that the results are verified. They don't care about the idea that the Supreme Court is trying to make sure that every single candidate presents evidence and all the electoral tallies that they collected so they can prove who actually won the election, and they can prove the result that the National Electoral Council gave. They don't care about any of that. They care about the coup attempt because they know that that's the only way they can actually reach power. So I think that is something that we need to be aware when it comes to corporate media and the lies that they're telling in Venezuela and what is actually happening on the ground right now.
Thank you so much, Andreína. That was fantastic. Up next, our final panelist, I'd like to introduce Alison Bodine. Alison is an anti-war, climate justice, and social justice activist and organizer with living in Vancouver, Canada, excuse me. She's on the editorial board of the Fire This Time newspaper and the author of the book Revolution and Counter-Revolution in Venezuela from Battle of Ideas Press. Alison was an international observer at the 2018 and 2024 presidential elections in Venezuela. And, on a personal note, Alison is also one of the co-founders of the VSN, and she's been a leader and a reference point in the North American solidarity movement with Venezuela for many, many years. Welcome, Alison.
Thank you, Leo, for hosting today's webinar, and to the Venezuela Solidarity Network, everyone that pulled together so quickly to make this urgent discussion happen. I'm really, of course, honored to be speaking with Jorge Arreaza and with Andreína Chávez, both Venezuelan voices that have contributed greatly to our post-election understanding of what happened in Venezuela, as well as our understanding of the Bolivarian revolutionary process over the past years. Later, I think we'll share some more articles in the chat and everything. But before I start, I will say that, I see my role on this panel of distinguished guests to really encourage people of the urgency to become involved in Venezuela solidarity. We have seen this onslaught of misinformation, disinformation, attacks on the Bolivarian revolution and democratically elected President Maduro increase, of course, in the past week. And that is a call to action for any of us living here, especially in North America, though I know and can see we have folks from Europe and across Latin America joining us as well. Really, it was been an honor to be part of Venezuela's 2024 presidential elections. On the ground, we experienced an incredible program of education, an inspiring opportunity to visit and exchange with people in Venezuela, whether it was, hearing people speak and describing their electoral system on a stage in front of the 900 electoral observers, or whether it was my own experience walking into a phone store wearing an electoral observer tag and having the person at the phone store explain to me that even though they were a simple phone store worker, they understood their electoral process and believed it to be the best in the entire world. And they wanted to convey that to me from their, what they called humble position as a single father in Venezuela. That's sort of beautiful experiences we can't exchange for anything. And the opportunity to travel to Venezuela and see it for ourselves is something that I'm sure all of the international observers would agree is an incredible honor. So over 900 international observers from over 100 countries joined over 1,300 accredited journalists for the Venezuela presidential elections observation delegation. Through an educational program in the days leading up, we were able to learn in detail about how the electoral system and its robust system of audits functioned, and also to exchange with one another about our experiences in talking with people on the streets of Venezuela leading up to the election. Many of us reflected, of course, on opportunities to be in Venezuela before 2019, 2018, and of course, those that were fortunate enough to be in Venezuela during the years of Comandante Hugo Chavez. We reflected upon how Venezuelans have continued their robust fight, their ongoing struggle against criminal US-backed sanctions, over 900 punitive measures against the people of Venezuela, doing exactly what Jorge Arreaza said, trying to strangle the Venezuelan people into submission, trying to prevent an election from being, able to be even held, while at the same time saying there's no democracy in Venezuela. We reflected upon what we did see was economic recovery, and that was a main message during the electoral campaign and the materials that we saw. Venezuela continues to fight back against these criminal sanctions, but has really done so in a way that is beginning to see economic growth, unlike is being seen in other parts of Latin America. When it comes to the electoral system, the integrity and transparency of the system were shown throughout our entire experience. On the day of the election, the 900 observers were deployed to polling centers across mostly Caracas, but not entirely, in order to observe the process. And we were also able to observe the materials that were distributed before the election. Of course, in any country, it's an important time for education during an election, to talk about your right and your duty to vote. And that is very much emphasized in Venezuela, where it's a simple system of walking around a circle of verified votes. Electronic and paper ballots has been described, but it's reiterated again and again because everyone needs to have access to vote. And I would say that that is, along with transparency and integrity, accessibility is something that is Venezuela's electoral system, and we never hear that in US media. So I'm just going to share a few pictures for anyone that hasn't had the chance to see what it would look like in Venezuela to participate in the electoral campaign. I know people have a lot of questions and lots of folks have already been reading, and I would also like to emphasize and really thank every single observer or Venezuela solidarity activist that has taken the time to write an article, a tweet, post something on Instagram, alongside the tens of thousands of Venezuelans that are also activated to defend Venezuela. This has been an incredible response, I think, from the solidarity movement, and something we need to build upon in all of our future work in solidarity with Venezuela. So leading up to the election, you can see this is a simple campaign table, ones that were set up in thousands of places around Venezuela. This is, of course, for the PSUV, but other political parties also had similar stations, encouraging people to vote and talking about the election. Very, dare I say, expected when it comes to an election campaign, except that it doesn't take, millions and billions of dollars to run for president in Venezuela. These are some of the educational activities. This is us learning about Venezuela's electoral system from the experts. This is the international accompaniers hearing from Diosdado Cabello, the vice president of the United Socialist Party, about the conditions leading up to the elections. And then we are in voting day. As I said, accessibility is a main message of Venezuela's electoral system. There is methods in place for people with disabilities to vote, of varying capacities to be assisted. There are very public lists posted outside of each voting center that are easy to check and people to assist if anyone has any questions. These are what the lineups may look like, everyone checking the list. This is early in the morning, actually very close to the hotel where we stayed, so an area that would be considered more of a middle-class area of Caracas. You can see lines already. And I would say early in the day, observers were very quick to begin reporting at the high voter turnout. We were not surprised at the nearly 60% voter turnout because all the stations we went to had lines throughout the morning, some people waiting up to 5 hours to vote. And it's a very efficient system. So it wasn't 5 hours because of inefficiency. It was 5 hours because of very long lineups. The mood of the day is tranquil throughout the entire day until we started getting reports at the end, which were touched on a bit, that Venezuelans were attempting to vote, because the one part of the Venezuelan voting system is that the polls stay open until the last person in line votes. So they open at 6 a.m., they technically close at 7, but if there's still people waiting in line, they'll stay open. And opposition far-right activists were attempting to close the polling stations early. That's not what's shown in this picture, though. What's shown in this picture is an audit taking place. There's people behind the fence that are the official witnesses that are watching the audit take place. And then there's people inside or outside also looking in as the audit takes place. People are interested in what happened at their polling station and are welcoming the transparency that's present. This is just walking down a random street in Caracas. And this is another version of that audit. So even in a voting center that, you know, is a bit more high security, let's say, because of the location where it happens to be, the audit is taking place inside and people are looking from the outside, curious about what's happening and feeling that their role in Venezuela's election didn't stop when they went to the polls and voted. But throughout the whole day, this is walking around Caracas at about 8 p.m. at night. You can see a sense of calm, and there was a sense of celebration throughout the whole day as well. And this is just one small example, a photo of listening to a press conference a few days after the election, and you can see the person wearing the electoral observation vest. Now, I'm sure you've seen lots more pictures, but I would been amiss not to share any, so I thought I'd share a few. Before I continue on, just to say that on top of this calm and celebration, Venezuelans know their electoral system very well, and it's well publicized and educated about, as I explained. You know, if the ballot is shared, the information is shared beforehand. Because this was Venezuela's 32nd election in 25 years. And something that Venezuelans are very proud of is their airtight electoral system, and also its constitutional backing. And that's something that the US media completely misses. They dismiss entirely that Venezuela has a constitution and its Bolivarian revolutionary process, and that has established how elections will go, what schedule they are based on, and what audits need to happen, and how the election is run through the CNE, the National Electoral Council, which we've already learned about today. It's as if the US government dismisses entirely, or at least the US media dismisses entirely, that Venezuela has any sort of constitution or civil society. And that's why going to see Venezuela for ourselves is so important. I also wanted to talk about mobilizing for the vote. When people say, oh, how could it be that so many people voted for Chavismo under such difficult conditions? The institutions of grassroots democracy within the Bolivarian revolutionary process were activated in a way that you can really feel when you walk through the streets of Caracas, or when talking to people that visited nearby states, they could also feel. because over 49,000 community councils, 5,200 militias, mass movements across the country, over 3,000, I believe 600 communes were activated towards the vote, towards being involved in Venezuela's democratic presidential election. And this creates an energy that leads up to the actual voting day. Just briefly, I'll say that I visited La Vega, a working class neighborhood which is well known for being well organized with community councils and multiple communes. And in La Vega, there were 63 voting centers just in this area, again, speaking towards the accessibility. I also visited El Valle, which is another working class neighborhood, and that's the neighborhood where lines were 5 to 6 hours long when we arrived at 12 noon. On July 28th, President Maduro won the presidential election, and the people of Venezuela won with this election because they saw through the propaganda of the United States, and this has been, really carried forward also through all the governments and people internationally that have recognized President Nicolas Maduro as winning the election. Once again, we're seeing graphs online that speak the truth about this when they show what countries support the democratic election of President Nicolas Maduro. And it doesn't include the US or Canada or the European Union, but when you look at a map, you see it really includes the vast majority of the world, just not those countries, those imperialist countries. And another thing that struck me is the same thing that struck me in 2018 when Venezuela was, and the people of Venezuela were really under the boot of US sanctions. And that is that every time people voted in Venezuela, they voted for the President Maduro and for the democratic and participated in their democratic process, knowing full well that every time they vote in President Maduro and vote to continue the Bolivarian revolutionary process, that it's going to create a deepening confrontation with imperialism, that sanctions will get more difficult, that the situation could become more intense with US intervention and attacks. But people I talked to in voting lines understood this. They know it, but they voted in defense of their sovereignty and in defense of their self-determination, and also voted in defense of the gains of the Bolivarian revolutionary process, which we won't, talk in depth about today, but are important for us as people in the US and Canada to understand and know about. So while talking to people in lines in Venezuela, I was trying to imagine, and I ask all of you to imagine, could you still vote for someone and a government that's defending your sovereignty and independence, even knowing that the United States would continue to punish you if you do? And people of Venezuela, once again, said, yes, we will. Now, a brief look at media, or, the transcript of the call between US Secretary of State Anthony Blinken and Maria Corina Machado and Edmundo Gonzalez on August 2nd, 2024, would make us think that there was fraud in the election, that Edmundo Gonzalez won, that it was clear. But the problem is that this was already predetermined by the US government. We could have read these articles 2 months ago because they were already saying there was going to be fraud if President Maduro won. They already wrote their narrative, and all they did on election day was put it into action. They put forward the narrative that Maduro couldn't possibly win. It wouldn't happen. Look at all of their polls, even though their polls are historically inaccurate or funded by the CIA. Now, the far right in Venezuela has rejected the results, but everyone could have predicted that. They have no basis, they have no evidence, yet the US media primarily is allowed to repeat this narrative again and again and have it repeated by other imperialist countries around the world. It's completely false cries about precinct level official results being withheld, or these falsified actas that we've already discussed, or the tallies. Venezuela's electoral process is going through its process and should be allowed to do so without US intervention. But the framework of the world that the US puts forward continues to be that the United States is the arbiters of democracy, along with our allies, including Canada or the European Union, when in fact the US government and their allies do not care about democracy one bit or legitimate elections in Venezuela. Their main interest is overthrowing the government of Venezuela and reversing the gains of the Bolivarian revolutionary process, however they can do so. And in this light, once we've learned as we have from Andreína and from Jorge Arreaza, we can see that the US allegations of fraud and the false claims of far-right opposition sound ridiculous. But there are serious consequences, and I don't want to forget that. Because when Maria Corina Machado gave the signal for violence to begin on the night following the election, that day violent gangs led by far-right thugs or just young people being paid $150 to take to the streets and target public institutions, community radios, and hospitals, people were activated. As international elections observers, we did not go outside. It was not the time to be observing what was happening in the streets of Venezuela, because the far right was moving and paying thugs to create and try and create violent actions to overthrow the government of Venezuela. People of Venezuela immediately responded and fight back, but there were members of Venezuela's National Guard that were wounded. Public institutions were damaged, and a Chavista leader, Isabel Cirila Gil, in the state of Bolivar, was killed by right-wing thugs. What the US government does to prop up these far-right actors in Venezuela has serious consequences and brings death and destruction to people in Venezuela as they try and foment instability. But really, the people have responded. And over the past week, I haven't been in Venezuela during these, but many reporters from the US and Canada have been on the ground. They've responded with mass mobilization, power in numbers, showing the power of Chavismo in the streets. And I really thank everyone that has been documenting that, because Andreína is exactly right. It wasn't shown one bit in Western mass media. If it wasn't for voices on the ground reporting back, we wouldn't know about the mass mobilizations or the doctoring of photos by the right wing. Everything that the Washington Post is relying on is a silencing of Chavista voices and a silencing of the vast majority of people in Venezuela. So as I convey hopefully a bit of my experience and the energy of the Venezuelan presidential election in 2024, what I want to end on is to say that this has really redoubled our responsibility to share the truth about what is happening in Venezuela. And so many people have become active in this. But I think we have the necessity to build on this and build a more united and stronger solidarity movement, which is what we're working towards with the Venezuela Solidarity Network. And that means building a strong movement in defense of Venezuela's right to self-determination, in which I think we can bring many different other people and broad forces on board, including more of the over 900 international observers, which came from different organizations in Canada, the United States, and around the world. I think we can bring more people around supporting the right of Venezuelans to choose their own government, as they have just done with this 2024 election. It's the Venezuelan Bolivarian Revolution and defending its independence has created a golden opportunity for progressive, leftist, human-loving activists to overcome fragmentation that has existed so long on the left. And I think we can unite around Venezuela and in defense of Venezuela against these US attacks. This is a movement that must involve people in the Latin American community, including folks that are working hard, especially in the Venezuelan community in the United States. This includes indigenous communities fighting for their own right to self-determination, whether here in Canada or in the United States. It means concrete actions, handing out information, petitioning, cultural events, bringing people from Venezuela to Canada or the United States, which many of us could say, and I will tell you, has been nearly impossible, especially over the last few years, given the complete break in diplomatic relations between the countries, but is something that we should still work towards and strive through. Because people in Venezuela, led by democratically elected President Maduro, are extremely capable of dealing with all kinds of internal counter-revolutionary sabotage. And this has not been more clear than it has been amplified over the last week. Imperialism is deeply threatened by the gains of the Bolivarian process. The more independent, revolutionary Venezuela becomes, the more it threatens military domination and soft power strategic influence. And along with and the US's attempt at hegemony over international markets and national resources throughout Latin America. Venezuela's independent government is a threat to imperialism because it is a source of inspiration for poor and working people in other countries who want to nationalize resources, redistribute land, organize their communities, and make sure basic human rights to food, water, housing, education, and health are provided to all. The strengthening of anti-capitalist and anti-imperialist movements across Latin America has created a huge fear and anxiety among imperialist governments. So for 25 years, the US, Canada, Europe, these Lima Group countries, their right-wing allies in Latin America, have battered Venezuela with attempted coups, economic sabotage, criminal sanctions, violence, and outright violations of laws, constitution, and sovereignty of Venezuela, on top of constant threats of military intervention. And we can expect that this will continue, no matter how the US presidential election ends up in a few months, or how under control the Bolivarian revolutionary process has successfully controlled the right-wing violence in this current time. As people living in the US and Canada, we must stand beside people in Venezuela, and that means immediately increasing our efforts to explain to people in advanced imperialist countries about the impact of the over 900 sanctions on Venezuela and about the impact of over 500 years of colonialism in Latin America. The most important way that we can help our compañeros and compañeras in Venezuela is by working here in the US and Canada or Europe to push these countries to drop all sanctions against Venezuela and end their campaign of aggression, sabotage, and threats of war. I'm calling on everyone here to redouble our efforts to build a movement in defense of the Venezuelan people, demanding US, Canada, hands off Venezuela, end the blockade against Venezuela, and respect the results of Venezuela's 2024 presidential election. I know folks have a lot of questions, but I really thank you for your time, and I'm sure we've got some announcements going in the chat.
Thank you so much, Alison, and thank you to all of our panelists. I know that Jorge Arreaza had to leave, but we do have a special guest for the Q&A. I'd like to introduce Carlos Ron of the Simón Bolívar Institute for Peace and Solidarity Among Peoples, and he's also the Vice Foreign Minister for North American Affairs of the Venezuelan Foreign Ministry. Welcome, Carlos. And let me start off with a question for you. You know, the far right has attempted coups in the past. They've called for the armed forces to rise up. They've called for military interventions from abroad. They've called for more sanctions. None of this has worked. I mean, they've failed repeatedly at this for 22 years, if not longer. What, if anything, do they gain by continuing these failed strategies?
Well, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to join you as well. I think that, you know, it's the constant attempt at, again, making sure that you overcome Venezuela's independence and Venezuela's sovereignty. I mean, there are two key issues that I think haunt the Venezuelan revolution, and is that Venezuela sits on top of the largest oil reserve in the world, and that Venezuela is an example for other countries to have an independent foreign policy, independent, popular democracy, and those things continue to be, you know, an obstacle for you know, corporate and you know, imperialist plans for the region. So I think they'll continue, you know, to attempt at regime change in whichever way they find possible. You know, the more the logic of capitalism, you know, fails to provide for you know, profit enlargement for these corporations, the more you're going to see you know, these attempts come back over and over again, even though they fail over and over again. I mean, the fact that the involvement that you see in this particular attempt of people like Elon Musk, you know, taking a particular role, you know, I don't know if our audience has followed this, but you know, there's been constant tweets back and forth of Elon Musk, you know, attacking President Maduro directly. I mean, it's something that he engaged, which is not different from what happened in the coup in 2019 against President Morales in Bolivia. I mean, these are people that are now telling you, you know, we need these resources and we'll coup, you know, we'll start a coup against whoever we want. So I think it's a, you know, a reinstatement of this policy of regime change for this particular interest.
Thank you, Carlos. And here kind of maybe a more technical question that we got from one of the attendees regarding the detailed breakdown of the voting station results. You know, typically in Venezuela's elections, we see that ENE publish this within a day or two of elections. Obviously, this has been delayed in part by the cyber attack. But now that we have this case in front of the Supreme Court, I mean, is that something that we're going to have to wait for the case to be resolved before the results are released publicly?
Well, I believe, I mean, well, first of all, you know, it usually took about 3 or 4 days to get, you know, even the first results, depending on the complexity of the election. That's important to say because, you know, there was this initial notion that, especially pushed forward by the Carter Center, you know, as if, you know, these results had to immediately be published. It's always been the first or, you know, first, second bulletins, and then as the days move forward, you start, you know, putting all these information in. Overall, the law stipulates, you know, Article 155 of the law of electoral processes in Venezuela states that there's a 30-day window where these results have to be published. So everything, I mean, even until now, is still within the legal framework. Now, as you mentioned, it's important because having activated this recourse before the Supreme Court, I believe that, you know, it would make sense that first, all the results that the CNE has provided to the court are first analyzed. Also, this whole week, the different political parties that promoted the different candidates, you know, remind our audience that it was 10 candidates who ran in this election. So all the representatives from those political forces that participated, they have been asked to also present, you know, whatever copies of the tally sheets or whatever, you know, whatever materials they may have in order to help do an extensive reading of these results. So it would seem more logical now to wait, and rather than to generate anxiety or you know, more tensions, you know, to wait for the process to finish and, you know, complete it's all complete the whole process so that you could actually have the published results.
And I think this might be for you or any of our other panelists, but about these exit polls that were published on the day of the election, a poll published by the opposition and then cited widely by the United States that claimed that President Maduro only received 30% of the vote. If someone could comment on those.
I can offer some perspective. As we were in Venezuela, going to the polls, we started getting like social media being like, oh, there's exit polls as observers. And the first thing that comes to our minds is we've learned and we know that exit polls are illegal in Venezuela. So this wasn't any sort of actual robust process where someone, you know, they did X amount of polls in X amount of neighborhoods and like came up with these good, so-called good results. Like the biggest thing is, where does this information come from? Who asked the question? How did they ask it? Somehow, I would say that I think something really important to explain to people, it takes a big shift in kind of our framework of thinking, because like I said, the US is considering that like we're the arbiter, and the US media in particular thinks they're the arbiter of what's a good election or not, or what's a good poll or not. And they can just say, oh, exit polls say this, without anyone questioning what's kind of exit poll, who sponsored it, aren't they illegal in Venezuela, like what's the actual data. We have to, it's hard to work. It's like working against culture right now that's blasting people with fragmented pieces of information and decreasing people's critical thinking. But we have to be there, and a lot of people have been, to say, wait, what are you doing? So I think that's the main thing, is to say that they're illegal, and also to expose, as you know, the geopolitical economy report and Ben Norton and others have done, like who are these pollsters, and why were these polls appearing also in the middle of the day when the election was still ongoing? It's all very irregular, it's manipulated, and a lot of it felt like it was coming from outside of Venezuela. And I think people saw that, not only the observers, but also people in Venezuela saw that.
And then I think we're only going to take one last question, because I've just realized we are at about maybe 20 minutes over time. What's the role that solidarity activists, and particularly Venezuelans living abroad, can play in supporting the people of Venezuela and in countering the opposition? This is for any of the three of you.
So I'm not quite sure that I have like a direct answer to that, but I've always said that the most important thing will be to try to tell the truth about Venezuela anywhere you are, whether that is by going to an interview, doing a panel like this one, writing an article, talking with family, talking with friends. I think the most important battle that we have in Venezuela is always trying to demonstrate or prove the truth that we have here, the reality that we are living on the ground, versus the reality that corporate media is trying to sell to the rest of the world. So that's one of the biggest battles that we have, the communicational battle. And that is something that we actually learned from Hugo Chavez from the beginning. He always told us that the first battle is the battle of the ideas. We first have to convince people of what is it that we are actually doing here, what the Bolivarian project is all about, what we have achieved with this Bolivarian project, what are the socialist ideas that we have, and what is it that the U.S. sanctions and U.S. aggression in general have done to the Venezuelan society. Because up until today, there are still many people around the world, many corporate media outlets saying that U.S. sanctions are being imposed only against the Venezuelan government. And we all know by now that U.S. sanctions are being imposed against almost all sectors of Venezuelan economy, and are affecting Venezuelan working class people across the country. So I think the best thing that you can do is always try to tell the truth about Venezuela and fight back against corporate media lies.
Thank you so much, Andreína. I would also add that if you are a Venezuelan abroad, if you are in Canada or the United States, join the Venezuela Solidarity Network. I think we also have a sister network or sister organization in the UK. And if you're not in either of these three countries, I think joining anti-imperialist movements in general is going to be positive to help reduce some of this pressure on Venezuela. I know that I said that was the last question, but we just got one more in that I think is very important. Carlos, could you talk a little bit about the connections between Zionism and Maria Corina Machado?
Well, definitely, there's important ties there. First of all, Maria Corina Machado has always been an outspoken Zionist. She has, in different moments, reached out to the Netanyahu government and asked for support in condemning President Maduro and condemning the Venezuelan government. At one point, her political organization, Vente Venezuela, also signed an agreement, I believe it was around 2021, if I'm not mistaken, where they signed an agreement where they actually said, about collaborating together, with Netanyahu's Likud party. It's a collaboration agreement, and there's been numerous opportunities when she has come out forcefully in defense of Israel, especially after October 7th, in defense of Israel, of its integrity. She has promised that if she were to become president of Venezuela at some point, one of the first things she would do was reestablish relations with Israel, not only that, but to establish the Venezuelan embassy in Jerusalem. Just taking it as far as Zionism can take it. So I think it's important that we understand that what we're facing here in Venezuela, it's not just an election. It's not just a difference of opinions of political ideologies, and this is not a normal situation in that sense. I mean, this is a true confrontation between a revolutionary popular process that is confronting international Zionism, international fascism. This is an arrangement where all these forces are coupled together. Its economic interests, its political alignment, it's racist and again fascist in all its sense of the word. Culture of terrorism, of racism. This is all together as part of the attempt of destroying the Bolivarian project and Bolivarian revolution. So when we look at Maria Corina Machado, when we look at this political group, we're not only facing an opposition group in Venezuela, we're facing an international coalition of interest against popular interest, not only in Venezuela, but in the rest of the world as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Carlos. And with that, I think we're going to close this webinar. I'd like to thank once again Jorge Arreaza, the Executive Secretary of ALBA, Andreína Chávez, journalist of Venezuelanalysis, Alison Bodine, a member of the Venezuela Solidarity Network, and of course, Carlos Ron of the Simón Bolívar Institute for Peace and Solidarity. And thank you also to our interpreters who've done a fantastic job and we're here longer than expected. And thank you for everyone for joining us tonight. And you will be able to find a recording of this on YouTube within 24 hours, I believe. Thank you again, everyone.